Action movies aren't the same anymore. It's hard to find even 10 recent action movies that are as good as classics like Rocky, Die Hard, or Kill Bill. The best lines from these older films became famous quotes, and the main characters were known by everyone. I'm not talking about general action movies, which include superhero movies, Star Wars, war films, and such. When you think back to early action movies, they usually involve a good guy on a mission to bring down a criminal empire, a complicated heist, or a top secret government job. That's the traditional action movie. But it feels like we've left them back in the early 2000s and the action genre has died. If you check the statistics, you might think I'm crazy, because the numbers show its market share is going up. But these aren't the same kind of films anymore. The latest Fast and Furious might technically be considered an action movie, but it's hardly comparable to something like Speed. They just don't make them like that anymore. Why did this change not just happen overnight, but over time? Martial arts, muscle-bound heroes, and simple problem solving. All of that seems to have vanished. In this video, we'll explore why action movies captivated audiences so quickly and why they faded just as fast. How did brands replace stars? And most importantly, what does it all have to do with the cultural revolution? Giving a definition to an action movie is not as easy as you might think. On the one hand, the concept seems simple. A strong protagonist battles enemies using any available means and ultimately wins. Still, even a quick look shows us how vague this definition actually is. Virtually anything can fit this description. For example, movies like Avatar, The Silence of the Lambs, or even Harry Potter. They all feature central characters who face and overcome various enemies. But we don't usually think of them as action movies, right? Action movies are known for certain features that make them stand out. And those from the 70s and 80s really set the standard for the genre. When we think of action movies now, we often picture those older films. Now, let's figure out what that standard was. What exactly must a movie have to be considered an action movie? Initially, despite these films being in color, their morals remained strictly black and white. Here is good and there is pure evil. Good fights against criminals, the mafia, and communists, simply because. How can it be otherwise? This dynamic continues even in movies where the roles seem to be reversed. Like in the first Rocky, for example. The collector/bouncer faces a regular professional boxer. But no, somehow Stallone comes across as honest and hardworking, while his opponent appears to be an arrogant show-off. The protagonist is usually someone the audience can root for, someone who represents ideals like bravery, resilience, and justice. So in action movies, the audience is initially inclined to sympathize with the protagonists, and there is no gray area between right and wrong. In other words, their world is painted in black and white. Moving on, a better description for early action movies might be an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. The main character is a willful machine, a paragon of masculinity, a warrior chosen by higher powers. Think about Arnold Schwarzenegger as Conan the Barbarian, who looks like he's made from the same rocks as his surroundings. No matter how many enemies he fights, he always beats them. Or think about Terminator. The number of enemies doesn't scare him. Bullets bounce off him as if he were made of rubber. And if someone tries to hit him, they could end up with broken bones. Remember all these memes about Chuck Norris? Another crucial element is the antagonist or villain, who is as well defined as the hero and often has goals or traits that clash with those of the main character. He is either a testosterone-fueled monster like the hero himself, or a leader of the whole country or a powerful corporation with endless resources. And then there's probably the most important rule. The good always triumphs over evil. Even if the good guy ultimately dies, justice still comes out on top. And the protagonist, of course, cannot just die for no reason. He might die, but he saves others. He died, but he wasn't destroyed. Then comes the gender composition, my favorite topic. The main characters, men and women, in these films are either lovers or victims who turn into lovers. And overall, the role of women has historically been limited, often stereotyped as the damsel in distress, a character that needs to be rescued by the male hero, reinforcing traditional gender roles. This portrayal not only ignores women, but also reduces their role to just plot devices that help develop the story arc of the male character. When it comes to teams in action movies, there's usually one woman for every 5 to 8 men. They're usually clueless about what's happening, dressed in sexy outfits for no good reason, and have random relationships with other male characters for comedic purposes only. At that time, gender issues didn't concern directors. They needed to show how tough guys destroy each other in the name of justice. Finally, the most important thing. Why did the best time for action movies happen specifically in the 70s? The biggest reason is connected to the Hays Code, or the Motion Picture Production Code. It was essentially a list of don'ts and be carefuls that dictated the content of movies in the United States from the early 30s to the late 60s. The main rule of this censorship was this: if you make a movie that could harm the minds of young Americans or undermine Hollywood's ethical standing, then your movie won't be shown anywhere and you will go bankrupt. And to be clear, back then it seemed like almost anything could damage the industry's reputation or confuse the young Americans' minds. Here is a small list of what was prohibited before the 70s. Nudity, man and woman in bed together, interracial relationships, the use of curse words, illegal activity, including drug trafficking, shooting, robbery, arson, sabotage, murder, and that's not even a complete list. Basically, everything that makes an action movie was prohibited. That's why the genre only began to grow in the early 70s, when the leash was somewhat loosened. This happened because the old strict system was replaced with a more lenient MPAA film rating system, which we still use today. However, action films also fascinated audiences beyond America. During the 70s, the industry took off in Hong Kong, the homeland of Bruce Lee, a pioneer of the genre. Had the Hays Code not been lifted, Lee might have never left Hong Kong for the States. Hollywood's influence, powered by its ability to promote films globally, would have been less impactful without these changes. Freed from previous restrictions, the film industry began rapidly producing legendary movies. While previously audiences could only expect trashy dramas about private detectives or Clint Eastwood westerns, now films like Bullet and The French Connection appeared on screens. Not yet those classic action movies, but the degree of violence and spectacle began to rise. The action movie genre really started booming when America fell in love with Kung Fu. Along with Bruce Lee, other big names like Lo Wei and Jackie Chan stood out. Back then, Jackie Chan was mainly using his hands and feet to fight, not furniture. By the 80s, the focus has shifted from fist fights to gunfights. Film production was streamlined and money flowed in like a raging river. Audiences loved the action movies in the 80s, which is often referred to as the golden age of action cinema. For people in the 80s, action movies weren't only about the thrills. They also captured something essential about the times. People wanted to escape and feel a bit better during a period filled with economic uncertainties and ongoing Cold War tensions. Heroes like Sylvester Stallone's Rambo or Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator became super powerful figures who could take on not just villains but entire armies and still win.
Are you telling me that 200 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
In short, the movies of this era had fascinating practical action, heroes that were easy to get behind, and plots that made sense and were easy to follow. Age of simplicity, age of classics. These movies didn't just make their lead actors household names, they also generated huge profits. For example, Die Hard, which starred Bruce Willis as the tough, wisecracking cop John McClane, was made on a budget of about $28 million, but earned over $140 million worldwide. Another example is Top Gun, which earned over $350 million worldwide and became a cultural phenomenon that boosted military recruitment and sold countless aviator sunglasses. Tim Burton's Batman gathered more than $400 million, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade nearly $500 million against a budget of $48 million. Can you believe these numbers? These numbers weren't just good, they were groundbreaking. They showed movie studios that action movies were a viable way to make money, leading to more investments in the genre. Directors had learned how to shoot them effectively, and audiences had started to really enjoy them. This, of course, made the 80s a perfect time to release franchises, which the decade became famous for. The essence of a franchise is very simple. If a studio sees that a movie is profitable, they immediately plan 1 or 2 sequels. Sometimes sometimes dozens of them, like it happened with James Bond. And most importantly, studios usually spend more money on every new sequel, in hopes of even greater returns. This focus on making more sequels might compromise the quality of the script, but that wasn't what drew audiences to action films back then. These movies were famous for their action and special effects. This is where lots of shootings and explosions come from. A good example is Rambo. Sylvester Stallone's character evolves from a justice-seeking Vietnam War veteran into a killing machine. With each new movie, there were more and more killings, and they got more graphic. People in the 80s really liked watching these intense scenes. But it was obvious that the story quality was getting worse. However, there were also franchises like Indiana Jones that didn't have these problems. Both the quality of the script and box office returns of Indiana Jones grew from one movie to another. This pattern of increasing spectacle is also seen in the Police Story series with the legendary Jackie Chan. While some of his movies might not be top-rated and can look quite silly, the talent of this man cannot be undermined. Many action movies banked on simply escalating violence, as we discussed before. Jackie Chan, however, brought a unique blend of martial arts and comedy that set his movies apart. He basically invented his own subgenre of action movies and became a global icon because of it. He not only performed his own complex stunts, but also choreographed them. Each new release was not just another sequel, but an evolution in Chan's artistic expression and stunt innovation. So studios were making good money, and actors also got their share. The growth of the industry is really evident in their salaries over the years. For example, in 1970, Schwarzenegger started with a salary of $1,200. In the early 80s, Conan the Barbarian paid him $250,000. And by the time he starred in Terminator 2: Judgment Day, he was earning $15 million per film. Sylvester Stallone's rise is even more dramatic. Before his major success with Rocky, Stallone faced severe financial difficulties. In fact, he was so desperate that he had to sell his beloved dog Butkus to a stranger in front of a liquor store for $60.
And at that time, I was down there. Had to sell my dog. We didn't have enough food to feed. I said, one of us doesn't eat. It's either you, my wife, or the dog. One of us.
This moment was a low point for Stallone, because Butkus was his best friend and had been with him through his toughest times.
I don't know why, even when I was totally broke, I always wanted to have an animal with me. And I mean, literally, I was, as an usher, making $36 a week. That was it, you know. And so I buy this dog. That meant I don't eat.
But then Stallone managed to sell his script for Rocky for $18,000 and buy Butkus back. But the price was a bit higher.
So finally I get the job, I go back to the fellow I sold it to, who now won't give it back. He paid me like $60 for the dog. He goes, I'll give you the dog back for $3,000. I said, I don't have $3,000. He goes, all right, I want to be in the movie. So I put him in the movie.
So he's in Rocky?
Yeah, he's the first guy, little scene.
Hey, Ralph, heard you did real good last time.
Absolutely, should have seen me.
Don't you think you ought to take a rest?
No, my back is hurt.
Your back?
My back is hurt. You deaf?
Yeah, the guy from the liquor store turned out to be quite smart. After this, Stallone no longer had to sell his beloved dog. And for the fourth part of Rocky, he already earned $12 million. By the way guys, if you're enjoying this video, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to my channel. It really means a lot to me. But back to action movies. So the industry was blooming. We look at the numbers and everything seems more than just fine. But when we look closer and study people's reactions, it gets more complicated. These highly successful movies don't feel the same as they used to. This is because the genre has changed a lot, and not just visually. In the 90s, it seemed like action movies began to lose it. On one side, some of the films tended to go over the top. The action lost motivation. It turned into action for action's sake. The stories became less meaningful as they leaned more into simple absurdities. And on the other side, many movies began to lose the key qualities that had defined the genre for years. The good old concept of good versus evil began to fade. Heroes weren't just the clear-cut good guys anymore. They started taking questionable action. Villains, on the contrary, had more complex and sometimes even understandable reasons behind their actions. This change made the classic victory of good over evil less certain. Questioning the true nature of good and evil became more important than simply who wins. The era of the one-man army was also ending. Now it was all about teamwork. The main heroes were still tough, but they began to show emotions and some weaknesses, making them easier to relate to. Women started to look and act more like actual people. They weren't just there to be eye candy, to scream and get rescued. They had more to do, more to say. We were still a long way off from today's standards, but it was a start. Take Bad Boys for example. Will Smith and Martin Lawrence played cops who were tough, but still everyday people, not stereotypical muscle-bound killers. They also worked together with a female character who ended up actively participating in the story. So in short, action movies of the 90s brought a new level of realism. Not that the plots themselves were always realistic. Alien invasions, AI and robots, time travel, all of it was still there. But the characters behaved more believably. Instead of sending a bulky Stallone without any survival instincts against a whole army, they would send a team. And they would maybe even try to figure out why these aliens or robots were so upset in the first place. It might seem to us now that action movies were so engaging that they could be rewatched over and over, but it's simply because we've grown tired of grey moralities and complex plot twists of modern cinema. It feels nice to turn off the brain for some time. Yet during the late 80s and early 90s, apart from these straightforward action movies, there was nothing that special. It was fresh gum for people. Everyone chewed it until it started losing its flavor. It wasn't that the action genre was dying, it was just evolving. The heroes were still likable and the action was still there. The 90s were like this awkward teenage phase for action movies. They still had some of the old magic, but they were also trying out new things, figuring out what worked and what didn't. And then 9/11 happened. A horrible tragedy that changed everything in America. This tragic day transformed almost every aspect of American life, impacting everything from fashion and music to cinema. It was like history split into before and after. The safety Americans once felt was gone. In such a world, a strong person alone wasn't enough. People needed extremely powerful heroes who could face any danger, no matter how big. Heroes who could stop disasters and keep the cities safe. Ultimately, it led to the rise of superhero franchises like Marvel, and back to a clear sense of good battling evil. This need for heroes was so strong that when Spider-Man was released just months after 9/11, it smashed box office records. The movie, with its bright colors and exciting fights, gave audiences a bit of joy, an escape they all needed. It showed people New York City not as a place of sadness, but as a city being saved by Spider-Man from essentially a flying terrorist, the Green Goblin. Watching Spider-Man swoop in and save the day was incredibly comforting. There was even a Spider-Man teaser that showed him catching a helicopter in a web between the Twin Towers. But after the attacks, that teaser was pulled from theaters and the scene was cut from the movie. These changes showed just how deeply 9/11 affected everything, even our movies. According to terror management theory, superhero movies help us deal with our deepest fears about death and chaos. Superheroes defy the odds, bring justice and show resilience. They're not just characters, they become symbols of hope and safety. In times of crisis, like after 9/11, they reassure us and remind us of the values that make life worth living. They help us imagine a world where good wins, a world we all want to believe in. In many ways, superhero movies are like a response to 9/11, trying to rewrite the narrative so that no one has to die. Ask yourself, who is the last actor who got you to enter a movie theater based on their name alone? The death of the movie star is one of the main reasons why the action genre has died. There used to be a time when a surname alone could sell a film. Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, Gibson, Seagal. But after the rise of superhero movies, it became all about brands. Think about it. Spider-Man No Way Home has grossed around $2 billion. Is it because Tom Holland is the biggest action star in Hollywood? No, not even close. Uncharted, a film that also starred Holland, only drew around 300 million. People are no longer going to theaters just because of who are the actors in the movie. Instead, they're drawn to iconic characters and franchises themselves. Spider-Man, Batman, these names have become brands that sell tickets, regardless of who's wearing the mask. And this isn't just about superhero movies taking over traditional action movies. It's about a fundamental change in how Hollywood operates. In the old days, actors were often tied to specific studios, and their names were everything. But now, action movies no longer have bankable stars, because the bank is in the brand. Just look at the movie Ambulance. The two main actors from that film were Jake Gyllenhaal and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. Jake Gyllenhaal is an amazing actor, but he's not a movie star. Yahya Abdul-Mateen II may be an Emmy award-winning actor, but he is not a marketable name. This change shifted more control to the studios than ever before. As a result, the star power that once made Hollywood so appealing is fading. Sure, there are still big names like Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Cruise, but even their ability to draw huge crowds isn't what it used to be. And it seems like there's no new generation stepping up to replace them. The focus has shifted from the star to the brand. And from the look of things, action movies, once the domain of these huge numbers, now depend more on the appeal of the franchise rather than on the charisma of individual stars. One of the foundations that classic action films relied on has fallen apart. But there's more to it. Action movies used to target exclusively white, straight men in the 18-34 demographic. Over the last 40 years, however, that demographic changed to the point where testosterone-fueled action thrillers are no a draw to them. Anyone who has been to an opening night screening of a Marvel Cinematic Universe film knows very well that it isn't children screaming in the theater for their favorite heroes. The men of today crave big cinematic CGI battles, which leads us to another reason why traditional action movies are dead: a changing society. First of all, gender roles. I think we already understood that the best action films are pretty sexist. In fact, many of the classics don't even pass the Bechdel test. It's a test for gender bias. To pass this test, a movie must have at least two women in it who talk to each other about something besides a man. And you'll be surprised how many films actually don't pass this test at all. In both Die Hard and Top Gun, there is one central female character and a few supporting ones. So the first point, check. Although they do talk to each other, it's rare and very brief. And most importantly, they don't have any meaningful conversations that aren't about men. In Terminator 2, there are also multiple female characters, but we never see them talk to each other. Finally, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom doesn't even have another female speaking role besides Willie Scott. So it completely fails the test. However, as the audience became more critical of these sexist undertones, there was a clear call for change. The post-1980s period marked a significant shift in social dynamics, with extensive social changes, revolutions, and reforms that significantly influenced the progression of feminism and gender equality. This transformative era gave rise to the third wave of feminism in the early 1990s, characterized by its inclusivity of race, class, and sexual orientation, and its critical approach to traditional definitions of gender and identity. A landmark event was the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women, where Hillary Clinton famously asserted that
human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights once and for all.
This led to what some might call the feminization of the genre, where the narrative began to shift towards more balanced or even female-led storylines. Films like Aliens, with Sigourney Weaver's character Ripley, showed that female characters could carry an action film with just as much kick as the guys. Then there is The Matrix, where the main guy, Neo, doesn't really become a hero until the end, leaning a lot on Trinity, another awesome female character, along the way. And who can forget about the Kill Bill series? Uma Thurman, aka The Bride, aka Black Mamba, shows what it really means to be a fearless lead in an action-packed saga. More recently, Fallout gave us another cool female lead who holds her own in chaos and danger. Despite these advances, the transition hasn't been without its challenges. Films like The 355, which attempted to recast middle-aged women in roles traditionally held by men, failed to meet financial expectations, indicating that merely swapping genders without thoughtful consideration of the story and characters might not satisfy viewers. I know that the feminization of the genre and of the cinema at large is a very big and controversial topic, and I definitely have my own views on it. If you're interested, I might dive deeper in an another video. For now, I've just laid out the facts for you. It also wasn't only about women. The depiction of men in these films also began to change. The traditional image of stoic and invincible action hero has been increasingly viewed as limited and unrealistic representation of masculinity. Going back to The Matrix, even the nickname of the main male character, Neo, can be seen as a reference to the image of new masculinity, which relies not on muscles and brute force, but on agility, professionalism, and empathy. Movies like Logan and the John Wick series showcase male heroes who express vulnerability and deal with personal loss, making them more relatable and human. This helps to break down the old stereotypes of masculinity that link emotional strength only to physical dominance. And of course, today's viewers appreciate movies that include a mix of races, backgrounds, cultures, sexual preferences, and physical abilities. This lack of diversity in traditional action movies limited their cultural richness and relevance, and made it crucial for the genre to evolve by including more varied and inclusive portrayals of characters to resonate with a global and diverse audience. Traditional action movies as we knew them might seem like a thing of the past, but they haven't disappeared, they've just changed to keep up with what viewers want. Today, action isn't just its own genre, it's everywhere. You'll find parts of it mixed into horror films, adventures, and even romantic movies. No matter what kind of film you're watching, chances are you'll see a chase scene or a fight. This blending shows that action has adapted, not died. It's become a spice that filmmakers sprinkle into nearly every story to keep us on the edge of our seats. So while the old school standalone action film might be rare now, its spirit is alive and kicking, giving us more of what we love. Heart-pounding moments that make movie watching experience so much fun. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed the discussion and subscribe to my channel for deep dives into the hidden insights of movies. Пока-пока!